Okay, so let us do a little recap, very, very brief. The discourse opened up with a discussion about the verse from the prophecy of Bilam, Mi Manah for Yaakov, who can count the dust of Jacob, Umispar Revi Yisrael, and can count the Rova of Israel. Rova being either the four parts or the quarter. Quoted the verse that says, Barasiv Yatsartiv Afasisiv. God said, I have created, I have formed, and I have made. The and introduces some new dimension, which we need to figure out what that is. In order to understand the meaning behind that verse and its deeper connotation, we go back to the existential question. Why does the soul come down to this earth in the first place? And the simple answer is that every descent, would you guys like to sit here? You guys, we can move over here. I know you got your angle there. If you don't mind, you can sit next to me, or you can, either way, whatever's comfortable for you. We know that every descent is for the purpose of ascent. Yerida tzorech aliyah. Descent is for the purpose of ascent, right? You don't go down somewhere unless you intend to go somewhere better than where you came from. You don't make an investment to lose your money. You want to make more money. You don't go to the gym and beat yourself up unless you're planning on coming out of there a little stronger. So God doesn't send the soul down to this earth unless the soul, when it returns, is going to go back to a higher place than where it came from. But this begs the question: what's higher than the source of the soul? The soul is a part of God before it comes down. And to emphasize this, the Alter Rebbe gives us some context. And that is, we have thought, speech, and action. We know that God created through speech. As the Torah tells us, the 10 utterances, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there be light, and let there be a firmament, etc., etc. The idea of speech as a means of, as an analogy for creation, is that the speech becomes separate from the person. It is from the person, it's deeply connected with the person, but when we actually speak, the speech leaves us. So there's a certain sense of disconnect between the words that are spoken and their origin. And so it is in creation. When we look at creation, definitely within our conscious creation, meaning our physical reality, where we exist, we see this as something separate from God. Intellectually, maybe we come to understand that it's not separate. Maybe our soul recognizes that it's not separate, but definitely our consciousness feels that we are something separate from God. So I like to say the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning is that you need to go to the bathroom. No matter how holy you are, you still have the bodily need, right? You can think that God runs the world and you know that God runs the world, but the first consciousness is self. And that is because we're created from speech. The soul, however, comes from thought, from divine thought. As the Medrash says, Yisrael alu b'machshava. Israel arose in God's primordial thought. Our thoughts remain connected with us. And we discussed at length that even the articulation of letters in thought is very ethereal. It's very abstract. When you hear words spoken, there's already formulations of speech. They already have a specific permutation. But in thought, you can think about an idea without necessarily focusing on letters. And it's very flexible. You can think the same thought in many different ways very quickly. So if our soul originates in God's thought, meaning if we originated in God's speech, so we'd say, oh, there's somewhere higher to go. The speech is already somewhat disconnected. So therefore, after the soul comes down to this earth, it goes up to God's thought. But if we originate in God's thought, we're one with God. So how could there be a place that we return to that's higher than God's thought? So that's the question and the summary of chapter 1. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Oh. That statement, it's like you, I know it's a stupid question, but it's like you're almost at a status of an angel at that point, right? The soul.
We're higher than an angel. Yeah. Because angels themselves are creations. God created the angels. The angels are a little bit interesting because they are created by God's speech. Very interesting. If you read in the verses of creation, of the creation story, it says, the verse says, ala aretz, and a bird will be upon the earth. And the Medrash says that the birds that are referenced there are angels. So God created angels also through speech. The difference between angels and us is the difference between, in a sense, between us and a stone, right? A stone has no consciousness. So it just is. We have consciousness, so we can navigate how much am I real, how much is God real, et cetera, et cetera. An angel experiences constant divine revelation. So therefore, their consciousness is all about God. So interesting, we're familiar with angels known as the seraphim, right? Fiery angels, or the angels known as chayos hakodesh, which means wild animals. We have no angels known as ophanim, which means wheels. What are the difference between, what are these names? So the level of consciousness that they have determines how they respond. When you're completely wrapped up in God's presence, you're like a wheel. You just roll. You're just completely dedicated and subservient. When you're what you would call either like a wild animal or a fiery flame, the distinctions are one is more ethereal and so on. There's a tension there. There's an up and down. I know you're real, God, but am I real? I know you're real, God, but am I real? Because there's a sense of self, but it's dominated by the divine revelation. The emphasis for humans is the opposite. We were so distant from a divine consciousness that the beginning is, I'm real. And then we question, is God real? We struggle to place God within our consciousness, within our earthly experience, which is why we study this stuff and we meditate and we pray and we do all these things, because it doesn't feel good to be separated. It's very lonely. It's a very lonely existence to be disconnected from purpose. So when we dig in and we recognize that there's something more here, that we're not just a puff of gas that landed in this universe, but that there's an intention here. So now we feel connected, and that gives the struggle meaning. What is the struggle? What is anybody's struggle? Everybody's struggle boils down to this tension. How real is God and how real am I? If we had only the consciousness of God, so health wouldn't be an issue. I'm not saying that a person wouldn't have a health issue, but they would know it comes from God and they'd understand that there's a purpose in it. We wouldn't struggle with livelihood. We wouldn't struggle with relationships. Why do we struggle with relationships? The only reason we struggle with relationships is because of ego. What is ego? Ego is a sense of self. I'd rather have it my way than given to you. I want you to understand the world. I want you to understand the world my way. So all tension, all conflict exists in this space. It's a conflict between self and the divine. So angels have less of that conflict, which is why angels don't sin. There's not enough self-consciousness that they can choose to do something wrong. Make sense? Chapter 2, page 18. So after the above mentioned words of truth, we need to understand what is the upside, what is the advantage of the soul descending into this physical world in clothing itself in a physical body. Since in its origin it is unified with the infinite light, blessed be He, at the level of thought, as we discussed, in the level of the hidden worlds, much higher than the level of name, as we discussed at length. Name and the word of God are a parallel, meaning a name is a tool for someone outside of you to relate to you, just as words are a way to express from within to without to connect with another. The souls are higher than those dimensions. So the answer is as follows. King David says, Yachad levavi liyira shemecha. It's a prayer, unite my heart so that I will fear your name. Unite my heart so that I will fear your name. We also echo the psalm in the prayers and the blessings prior to the Shema. We say v'yached levavenu, and unify our heart la'avo liyira shemecha, to love and to fear your name. What is this idea of unifying our heart? Is there someone here for the class? Does it look like it? Yes? I'll let them in. I got them. But Inyan, the matter is as follows. Kiyesh bechinas ru'usa deliba. There is a level called ru'usa deliba, desires of the heart. Please come in. There's a copy for you. There is a level within ourselves called desire of the heart, ru'usa deliba. The yesh bezeh beis bechinas. Just find the seat anywhere you'd like. The yesh bezeh beis bechinas. There are two levels in this thing we call the desires of the heart. Pnimis v'chitzenis. Now, obviously, we're talking about a desire of the heart, yearning for divine connection. Ru'usa is actually a difficult word to translate in English. Ru'usa almost means like a pining. There's like a pulling. The heart is being pulled somewhere. This pulling of the heart has two dimensions. There's an external dimension and there's an internal dimension. Now, what does that mean? Bechinas pnimis nekudas halev hi bechinas ahava rabba shelamayla mehatam vadas uba melamayla bechinas matana k'mesh kasav avodas matana etenis kunaschem. I'm going to read a couple of the paragraphs here and then explain it. So the inner aspect of this heart's desire, this yearning of the heart, is not rational. It's not intellectual. It's not something you can make sense of. It's just this pulling of the heart that just wants to break free. And it's a gift that we receive. You can't earn it. You can't acquire it. It's a gift that's given to you. And he quotes the verse, parallel, that it's a service that is a gift that I have given to the priest. The notion being that if one has this yearning of the heart, it's a gift from above. Page 20. The external, the outer aspect of this heart's desire is a result of knowledge and contemplation in God's greatness, each one according to their capacity. And according to the level of their knowledge and understanding and awareness, so too is the awakening of the heart. So we are human beings, we're rational beings, which means that we have, there's a fundamental principle which the Alter Rebbe talks about often, is that moyach shalit ala lev, the mind, the brain, controls the heart. Right? The brain controls the heart. It's the premise for all healthy living, is that our brain can tell our heart what to do, how to feel, or at least how to act. Right? Sometimes you can't control a feeling, but you can control not to act on the feeling. Today's therapies, there's endless therapies, and the world of therapy is constantly evolving, psychotherapy, trying to understand how we heal and master and navigate these different dimensions that make up our feelings, which interfere with healthy relationships and healthy living. But at its core, there's a belief that the mind has the ability sometimes to actually change the feelings of the heart, but definitely to control how we act from the heart. Now, if you decided, we were in Israel just recently. You may have heard of a rabbi named Adin Steinsaltz or Adin Even Yisrael. So he was a probably one of the greatest minds of our generation. He was the first one to translate the Talmud into English, and he's written endless books, commentary on the prophets and the scriptures and the Torah and so his son, he passed away 3 or 4 years ago, and his son's wife grew up with my wife. So we went to eat there Shabbat day last week. And on the way back from the old city, from prayers, I said to him, so tell me what projects are you involved in? Because since his father passed, even when his father was alive, he was involved in this. But since his father passed away, he's been involved in publishing his father's works. And there are a bunch of different series of things he's working on, having published. And he says, after all of that stuff, there are 80 books that are waiting to be published on random topics, not all Jewish in nature. One of them, I think it was frogs. A book on frogs. Okay, his father was interested in frogs, so he did research and he studied and he wrote a book on frogs. Now, let's say you decided, so he said he's not sure if that book's ever going to get published because no one may ever be interested in it. Let's say you decided today, you know what? I want to become obsessed with frogs. I don't know why you would want that, but let's say you decided. And for the next 3 years, you studied frogs. You read every book, you watched every video, every National Geographic. You went to wherever frogs live and studied them and looked them. And do you think you'd get excited about frogs? You'll likely get excited about frogs. Definitely more than I'm excited about frogs, right? You get excited about frogs. Why? Because your mind, the investment of the thinking ultimately trickles down into your heart. So even if your heart didn't feel a certain way before, it's birthed. The feelings are birthed, let alone, I'm sure there's a really existential purpose for frogs in the world, but let alone if we're talking about things that are more relevant, purpose in life, a particular relationship, a particular philosophy. If you invested yourself in the study of it, you'd come to a place where you'd be impassioned by it. So if we have a premise that we believe that God created the world, and we understand this tension that my first consciousness is of self. But I wanted to come to a place where I moved my consciousness away from self, somewhat towards a greater consciousness of the divine. How do I do that? I do that through study, contemplation, and meditation. Now, the results are going to be different for each and every one of us, based on a couple of factors. Number one, your intellectual capacity. No offense to anybody. Some people have a higher IQ, some have a lower IQ. But it's not just IQ. It's not just information. It's also awareness. How much does that information relate to you? Some of that might be your own just genetic makeup. Some of that might be based on narrative, your own internal blockages. It also might be how much you've studied about this stuff before. If you've spent years and years studying, so when you make your investment, it's gonna trickle down more significantly. So there are all these different factors. But by all accounts, if one invests themselves with das, with knowledge and understanding and contemplation, there's going to be a result that your heart is going to feel a greater sense of consciousness. Everybody agree? If you don't agree, speak up. Makes sense. Which is, by the way, the structure of prayer. If you look in the prayer book, the first part of prayer talks about God's presence within nature, because that's most relevant and close to us. We look at nature. You look at these beautiful trees, and I was walking to services yesterday, and I decided to stop and smell the hummus for a second. So I started looking at the leaves on the trees, and in the center of every leaf, there's a center stem that goes from the base to the point, and then there are varying different veins that come off of that center, right? But then there was one leaf that the center vein didn't go straight through. It went kind of on an angle. Now you know. But my point being is that that's fascinating. Why is that? What is the name of that tree? How did this particular tree get that particular vein? You take a seed, you plant it in the ground, and a tree grows. Another interesting thing, I was studying the daily portion of Maimonides yesterday, and it's talking about the gifts that you need to leave from the field for the poor. And I just found it to be a great gift coming from Israel now, where we traveled all over the country, and we're able to see, really, in a certain sense, you don't get to see this living in your typical American metropolitan city, even if you went to the farmlands, how fields are, how people plant, how vineyards grow, how wheat fields grow. The difference is interesting. How the Jews plant versus the Arabs. They build on terraced land along the mountain. Very interesting nuance there. But suddenly the text comes to life, right? So you look how things work in the world, and you think about it, and you invest yourself. You meditate, you study, and then you begin to realize, wow, we're not living disconnected. And then you look deeper, you look into your own body, and you begin to explore the cosmos. Then you move into the spiritual realms, right? The more we invest ourselves in this, the greater the likelihood that it will trickle down into our heart, and our heart is going to feel love. We're going to want to feel connection to God. So that's what's called ahavas olam, love of world, or it's a love that's born from the world. This is what he calls here chitzonius halev, external, the external pining of the heart. It's external not because it's simple, but because it's something that is born from a finite space. From our intellect, the feelings are born. Whereas the first one is beyond rational thinking. It's just this gift that you get, that you suddenly feel this yearning. And by the way, I'm sure you've all interacted. I definitely have as a rabbi have interacted with people who show up here because they are struggling with something. They're navigating something in their life, and they need to get themselves anchored. And then you have people who show up for no reason. They just feel a calling. They feel a pulling. It's a gift. And the difference is that when it comes as a result of your own process, in a sense, it's more solid. It's not as powerful, but it's more solid. Whereas when you get this gift, it's very powerful, but it's not as solid. It's not as anchored. And therefore, if you don't anchor it, if you don't catch it and anchor it, it'll go away. Okay, but these are the two types of pinings of the heart that we're talking about here. So far, so good? Okay. Middle of 20. V'hine, mudar zois. It's known, ki hazeh l'um hazeh asa Elokim. In Ecclesiastes, King Solomon says that everything in holiness has something corresponding in unholiness. It's got to be an even playing field, right? You can't have a heavier dose of holiness and a lower dose of unholiness, or vice versa, and say this is a fair fight. It's got to be a fair fight. In order for there to be a fair fight, everything in the realm of holiness has got to exist in the unholy and vice versa. So, just as there is this idea of knowledge, the word knowledge in Hebrew is da'as, But das is much more than knowledge. What is knowledge? Knowledge is not intellectual. It's a result of intellect. But knowledge is awareness. You ever hear somebody say, now I know? You say, now I understand when it's intellectual. You say, now I know when you connect with it. That's what I was studying. That's the experience. Knowledge is awareness, right? So he's saying that just as there is awareness in holiness that leads a person, Ladasas Hashem, to know God, to have that awareness around God, Ulahava Isai, and as a result of that, to love God, right? That's the outcome of this process, is that we come to love God. So too, there is knowledge on account of the unholy realm. V'hu das hara, and that is knowledge, that's negative knowledge, which is v'leiv dvarim zarim v'lesav yavakish nifrad, to love strange things and to desire, and that one who desires becomes separated. Because they invested themselves in the pleasures of the physical world. In other words, just as we said, exploring frogs is not negative; it's just neutral, right? But just as you can explore God and you can explore a relationship with God, you can explore neutral, and one could become obsessed with negative things, right? People can explore, how do you manufacture weapons to kill people? Right? I don't. That wasn't a pacifist. That wasn't the opposite of that. Is not pacifist. I'm saying that people can intentionally go figure out because they want to kill people. They're not trying to protect people. They're trying to kill people. So how do we? What's the worst weapon we can come up with? Or you have these crazies who explore how they can create internet bugs to affect people's machines. So they invest themselves. They're excited about it. They're passionate about it. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to hurt people. And it doesn't even have to be that grand in our own personal worlds, in our own lives. As he says, a person can explore strange desires, right? We each of us, as the Hasidic saying, each of us knows the afflictions of our heart, right? We all have our mishigasim, we all have our hang-ups, and we explore them and we pursue them. And if we invest ourselves in them, we become excited about them. So and this is the job of the Beinani. Let me give context before I translate the rest of the paragraph. Those of you that have been around for a while are familiar with this concept, but I'll give it to you very briefly, 60 seconds. The Alter Rebbe in the book of Tanya, which is his primary book on Chabad philosophy, tells us that the human being is made up of two primary souls, a godly soul and an animal soul, spirit and body. The godly soul yearns for divine connection, purpose, meaning. So whatever your belief system, the point is it's the part of us that yearns for something more. It looks to be higher. And then you have the animal soul. The animal soul is an animal. It's preoccupied with self. Just wants to be, wants to feel good, wants to pleasure itself, and that's what it is. It's the drive that allows for us to survive, to eat, to drink, to procreate. It's a neutral force, but it's at its core, it's preoccupied with self. There are three types of people. There are people who are in the control of their animal soul, means the dominant in their consciousness is me, 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 me. And by the way, you don't have to be a narcissist to be preoccupied with self. You just need to be very human and not open to anything more, right? Then you have the other extreme, which is those that are dominated by their godly soul. In fact, according to the Alter Rebbe, they have no animal desire. All of their physical desires are controlled and driven by their divine consciousness. And then you have the human ideal, which is to live in the conflict, to live in the tension, but not to succumb. And I'd like to believe, for the most part, that's the realm that we live in. Most people that we hang out with are good people, meaning they're not perfect. I don't want to get into the specific technical definition, because according to the Alter Rebbe, if one does any kind of sin, you're out of the playing. But let's keep this more broad right now, that most of us, hopefully everybody in this room, is what we would call a good person. Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, and doesn't mean that we've never done anything wrong, and it doesn't mean we might not do something wrong today. But we live in this tension between wanting to live a life of meaning and a life of purpose, and to be a good person and to do good in the world. And at times, our body is preoccupied with self and wants to do what's in our own interest, even at the expense of that good that we desire. Yeah.
That process, it's very easy for the animal soul to find what it wants. It's clear to them as a person, a human, I think, or something that sounds like that. Desires like clear, I want to eat that piece of cake or whatever. The godly soul seems like something has to be refined and worked on and to manifest itself. Doesn't seem like it's so easy. You know, sometimes I don't like to be told often, but it sounds like that. You know, desire can come quick, and it's not like a lot of contemplation, you know, I want that. But
Yeah.
since the mind controls that, it's almost like, really? Well, it has the capacity to control that, right? Not like it just pops open, okay, you know, the water's hot and I turn it off.
Right. So what happens when, let's find a good neutral example. When your coworker comes into the office in the morning, and you can tell right away that he's in a bad mood, and he says something nasty to you. So at that moment, your body's reaction is to give him one back, right? But because you've been working on yourself, and you realize that people are people, and that you also have an animal soul, and that you want to live higher, so you pause for a moment, and you say, let me have some compassion for this guy. He's just having a rough day. He woke up on the wrong side of the bed. So even though part of me really wants to sock it to him, I'm going to let my mind, as a tool of the godly soul, control my response. And either I might say nothing, or I'll say something compassionate, you know, however I'm going to react. Now, the reality is that the animal soul is a very complex creature, which, back to the world of therapy, that's why we have therapy. The animal soul is got a genetic makeup, right? We've got a genetic makeup, predispositions to certain types of emotional characteristics. We also have a narrative that we've adopted because of our parental upbringing and the influence of the culture within which we grew up. Then we have other kind of wirings because of choices that we've made prior to this moment. And therefore, when we show up in this moment, for one person, they're going to be so fired up when that person says something to them that they're not going to be able to control it. Their animal soul is so in control of them. But the ideal of the Beinoni is to constantly work at that, is to figure out what are my triggers. And again, you know, it's why do I walk into that room and jump into the chocolate cake? Why can't I pause for a second? Right? You know, why when my wife says something to me, I have to shoot my mouth off? Why when I see something on the street that's not appropriate, do my eyes draw there? The question is not why it's actually, that's not, let me rephrase it. It's not why do I want to react? I know why I want to react, because I have an animal soul. And my particular animal soul is wired with these predispositions and these triggers because of whatever. Maybe my therapist can help me understand what my father said to me, or my mother said to me, which is why I respond that way, which helps to some extent. But at the end of the day, this is the fundamental principle. Going back, we touched on this in the first chapter. We have the capacity to control our thought, speech, and action. We can't control what we feel. We can educate what we feel. We can work towards educating what we feel through this process. But at the end of the day, we can't control what we feel. But we can control what we choose to think about. We don't have to obsess over things. We can move our minds thinking to other things. We definitely can control what comes out of our mouth. And we absolutely definitely can control what we do. So it's the God, by the way, you're 100% right. It's the work of the godly soul. But it's the work of the godly soul with the animal soul. The godly soul is perfect. Godly soul is not the one that's got the problem. It's the animal soul that's got the problem. The godly soul, though, is the key. The godly soul is the solution to say, I want to live higher. So therefore, since I want to live higher, I'm going to use my brain to work on these various different components to anchor them, to heal them, to control them, whatever it might be. That's the realm of the Beni. That's the hero. You know, there's this notion in Jewish thought of a tzaddik, the righteous individual. And the righteous individual is very, very important. But they're very few. There are very few righteous people in this purest sense, the one who's only dominated by their godly soul. It's not life. If we were all righteous, we can all retire. There's nothing to do here. The righteous people don't even come to this earth for themselves. They come here to help us. And to be wicked in the conventional sense, meaning to be in the control of the animal soul, just me, 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 what kind of existence? A disgusting existence. Life is lived in this middle space, and it's miserable sometimes. You want to wake up in the morning and say, I don't want to fight today. I just want things to go. I just want to do the right thing. I don't want to have to struggle. I don't want to have to think about my triggers today. I just want to show up and do the right thing. And that's hard, but that's called living. That's what it means to be alive. That's why the Alter Rebbe wrote a book for this person called the Beinoni, this intermediary person, this ordinary person. I'll share one more thing before we go further. In the Shema, and this is here's where the hope is, so to speak. In the Shema, we start with the contemplation, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, which is an anchoring. It says, at the end of the day, at the core of everything is divinity, it's godliness, it's spirituality. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuso Le'olam Va'ed, blessed is his name and his kingdom forever and ever. That's a recognition that God created separation. In other words, that our consciousness, which is not a divine consciousness, is God's creation. It didn't just happen. There's intentionality. There's the truth at the core, and then there's how God brought us into a state of consciousness where we are preoccupied with self. It's not a fluke. This is part of the design. What's the purpose of this? V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, to come to love your Hashem, your God, b'chol levavecha, with all of your hearts. Not with all of your heart, with all of your hearts. What does that mean? It means that we can get the animal soul to get excited about doing the right thing. We don't have to relegate ourselves to saying, I'm always going to have to fight with myself. There may be parts of us that we'll always have to fight with, but there are parts of us that we can get on board. We educate the body that it's in the body's interest. We do this every day. I mean, hopefully. We go exercise. It's not fun to exercise. It's hard work. You go to the gym and your trainer makes you lift more pounds than you can handle, and you say, I can't do it. He says, you can do it, you can do it, then you're tearing your muscle. And why do you do it? Because you know it's good for you. And that's why you go back for more abuse, right? It's what we do. Or if you diet, why do you diet? Because you want to feel good, you want to feel healthy. So your animal knows that it's in its interest to do things that are difficult. We can educate the animal to not be so preoccupied with self, because it's in its interest to be connected to something higher.
If one chooses to believe in the evolutionary theory, when did the human soul come about in humans?
You'd have to ask somebody like that.
I mean, if you choose to believe in that, then we did not have the human soul to begin with. It came along at some point.
Yeah, so I meant that tongue in cheek, but I also mean it seriously. In other words, the whole premise of Jewish practice is that humans are not an an evolved creature. We are created by God as an independent creature, as a unique creature. And as we mentioned, I think earlier on in this discourse, that all other creatures came into being, body and soul at once. And only the human being was created body and then soul. God blew into Adam the breath of life to emphasize this point that we human beings are two separate beings. There's a godly soul and an animal soul.
The evolutionary theory came about by man.
Doesn't make it right. Huh?
It's a theory.
It's,
Well, I mean, that's where it came, scientists discovered this, so maybe it's not true to begin with, but it came from us. And if we were created by something else, then that's an opinion of man, it's not the real thing.
right. Look, we, we can have a discussion about evolution and other scientific theories, and I don't mean to to dismiss any of science. Science is what it is. It's humans trying to understand and coming up with theories, some of which hold long-term value, and others that are disproved or others that are changed over time. It's interesting. There is in the commentators on the Torah, they do see the 6 days of creation as within itself an evolutionary process, right? Because if the things that were created on the 6th day came on the 1st day, they wouldn't have been able to survive. So there is an evolutionary process within creation itself, which is true, by the way, for man as well. If man was created on the 1st day, it would have been a mess. So man needed to be created when man was created. But the Torah explicitly says that man was created by God, it was formed by God, and his spirit was vivified through the breath of God. Now, where does science go? Science, like I said, is constantly evolving. I think even the theory of evolution is not a universal theory, and it would be an interesting conversation to have with someone who believes in evolution. Which the next question is: so what are we doing here? Are we living a higher life just so that we don't destroy each other? There's a value to that, but let's not call that morality, right? We just evolved and we all ended up here, and it's good that we've got rules and it's good that we've got philosophies and theories, keeps everybody intact and keeps the court systems in place, and we don't tear each other's necks out. But that's not why we live an upstanding life, just so that we don't get killed, right? I had a teacher who used to say, "Are you alive because you're alive, or are you alive because you didn't get hit by a car?" Like, what does it mean to be alive? Am I alive? Am I really living? Or is it just the fluke that I didn't yet get killed? Are we living here because we have a purpose here? Or did we just end up here? You might say that even if we just ended up here, there's still a good set of rules to follow. Makes it good for everybody. But that doesn't make it moral. It just makes it workable. But it would be an interesting conversation. Yes. We're always going back to the struggle. Good. I'm happy for you. Some days I feel that way, most days not, but yes.
Believe that we have two souls. It gives us focus, and that there's privilege in focus.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful. What she said is that the fact that we have this knowledge, that we have these two souls, it gives us privilege in the struggle. It gives us what was the other word you said? It gives us focus in the struggle, which I think is a really powerful statement. One of the things that I think in modern psychology, psychotherapy, that's becoming very evident is that people have such high demands of themselves. Right, we have such expectations of ourselves, and the social media makes it that much worse, because you look on social media and you see somebody that, wow, they've got such a perfect life, which is nonsense, and you know that it's nonsense, but you see the picture anyway and you think that it's perfect, and then you start judging yourself why your life isn't that way, right? Perfection is only for God. Only God is perfect. Life is about excellence. It's about facing the challenge every day, winning sometimes, unfortunately losing sometimes, and trying to do better the next time. That's what it's about. That's what life's about. It's waking up every day and saying, hey, I'm gonna fight the good fight today. I'm gonna try to be the best person I can today. I've been given a set of circumstances, a set of complexities of who I am, and I'm gonna do my best to navigate that. So this is the Beinoni. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says on page 21. This is the service of the Beinoni. And remember, it's the outer aspect, right? Because how does the Beinoni, how does the average person navigate this? How do you create some kind of mastery or excellence? Got to use your brain. You got to think about it. What's my triggers? What's my purpose? And try to navigate that. When this one comes up, the other one goes down. In other words, it's a constant struggle. The first love that we mentioned, the love that comes from the inner dimension of the heart, which is above knowledge, which is above rational explanation. So the love that is given to us as a gift, there is no counter to this. We said that there's a counter in everything in the positive, there's a counter in the negative. There's no counter. There's a counter in the rational love. You can birth rational love for God, and you can birth unhealthy love for unhealthy things. But the gift that comes from above has no counter in the negative. That's literally a gift. It comes from the level of Yechida, which I'm going to explain in a moment, which has only one will, which is for her Father in heaven. This level has nothing comparable in the physical world, this desire to want nothing other than God alone, which is found in the children of Israel, the nation that's close to God. As it's written, for they are a stubborn people, and I will forgive them, that they're a stubborn people. So let's explain. If you want to look on the bottom of page 22, we have the 5 levels of the soul. And 5 levels of the soul are as follows. First of all, we have what's known as the inner dimension of the soul, and those are the first 2 levels, Yechida and Chaya. Inner dimension, or what you might call the essence of the soul. And I'll share something that might be interesting to you, and that is that part of the soul doesn't live in the body. Those 2 levels of the soul, what we call the essence of the soul, remains in heaven. It remains connected to the body through 613 strands, 613 connection points, and it gives the 3 dimensions of the soul that are in the body their consciousness. Now, let's talk about the soul for a second before we talk about how the soul shows up in the body. I don't mean this, but I'm going to say it just to contextualize. Let's think about the soul as being our conscience. The reason why it's not our conscience is because the soul is far deeper than conscience. But let's run with that for a second. Let's say your soul is your conscience. Your conscience shows up in how you act. Your conscience shows up in how you speak, and your conscience shows up in how you think. The 3 now, when your conscience shows up, it needs a tool, it needs a glove to express itself because it's an ethereal being. So the glove, so to speak, that the conscience manifests itself through are the 3 lower levels of the soul, known as nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Now, the translation of all these words, nefesh means soul, ruach means spirit, neshama means soul. Neshama actually means breath. For the purposes of our conversation, we're not going to translate them. They're just soul. They're different dimensions of soul. But they're the dimension of the soul that's operating. when we allow the soul, the core of the soul, to express itself in action, the core of the soul to express itself in speech, and the core of the soul to express itself in thought. The two dimensions of the soul that are not in the body, that are what we call the essence of the soul, don't really show up in the day-to-day function of the human. Because for the most part, our lives revolve around a normal conscience and normal expression in thought, speech, and action. There are occasions in life where we face something that challenges the confines of thought, speech, and action. That could be that our pull towards unhealthy, unholy thought, speech, and action is so strong that we need to call on something that transcends that. And it could also be that there's an opportunity in front of us that we need to have this inner strength to push us forward, where the thought, speech, and action is not going to push us there. One of the places we went to visit in Israel, we had this unbelievable opportunity that came our way, where this gentleman who's involved with bringing energy to the soldiers and you know, just pick-me-ups, we connected with him and he drove us down. We went to the Rafah crossing and the Kerem Shalom crossing. We were literally at the border of Israel and Gaza. And there were soldiers coming out of Gaza and soldiers going into Gaza. And there it's 110 degrees. I'm dying in the heat. And these men and women are dressed in full body armor, head to toe. And they're singing and they're dancing and they're energized. And I like, where does that come from? Where that's not rational. How do you get yourself to move? How do you get yourself to take action when your life is in danger? How do you get yourself to step up when all of your triggers are flared up? Right? You can't, you're stuck. Whether it's standing up for what's right in the world, whether it's standing up for your family, whether it's doing the right thing for yourself, how do you get yourself to move at that moment? You can't call on the regular functions of the soul because those are limited. They're limited because they're in the body. So you got to call on something higher. And those are the higher two dimensions of the soul, Chaya and Yechida. Now, what the Alter Rebbe is telling us here is that when we are given that gift of love, which we didn't earn, which we understand now why you can't earn that gift, because it doesn't come from within the normal confines of the soul. It comes from above. It's not something you birth from your intellect. It has to come from somewhere else. It gets channeled to the human experience through the highest level of the soul known as Yechida. Yechida means singularity. It's the unified dimension of who we are, where we're one with God. And for whatever reason, God decided at this moment to infuse us with this dimension of love. Now, I will say, to be completely fair, that you could create a setting for this gift to be received. You could do some work to set the stage to receive this gift. If a person works on their character and you work on your actions and you work on your speech and you work on your thought, you're a more likely vessel to receive the gift when it comes. Which is really, we still got a little bit of time, but as we enter into the final month of the year, the Hebrew year, in about 5 weeks, the month of Elul is designed to set the stage that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we can receive that gift. Because Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, especially Yom Kippur, is a day of Yechida. It's a day of the highest dimension of the soul. It's a day of closeness to God. So we're primed, we're open, we're available. But as the Hasidic saying says, that on a field that's not plowed and not seeded, nothing grows. So if you plow the field and you seed the field, then when it rains, it'll grow. So if we do the prep work, then when Yom Kippur comes around, we're more likely to receive that gift. But for the most part, in the normal course of life, it's not made available to us. It's a gift. And that gift comes from this highest dimension of the soul known as Yechida. Now, go ahead.
So when you say muzzle shove somebody, is that what you're asking? You're calling them, right? You're calling from the highest thing that goes to that person.
Yeah. More or less. Mazel is it's not luck, right? We throw it around as luck, but why do we call it luck? In a sense, because it's not something you can earn, right? If the gift is meant to come, you're going to get it. So loosely, we'd call it luck, but luck is also chance. This is not chance. This is divine intent, but it's not something you can earn for yourself. So we wish Mazel Tov is, we recognize that there's a gift that this person's received, and we wish for them more of that. We're calling from the Mazel that brought about the blessing. Yeah. Now, the Jewish people are known as a stiff-necked people. And we laugh at it, and not only do we laugh at it, but the Torah actually calls us the stiff-necked people in specific context of very not nice behavior. Kvetching, a lot of kvetching, a lot of complaining earns you a stiff-necked people. Like no matter how many times you hear the message, you don't seem to get it, right? Okay. But there's a positive to it. What's a stiff-necked people? A stiff-necked people means that we operate from a place that's higher than rational thinking. What do you mean when somebody's stubborn? You say you're stubborn. What do you mean you're stubborn? It means you're not listening. You're not opening yourself up to what I'm trying to explain to you. Why are you being so stubborn? And what does the person say? They come back with a counter argument. Why what you're saying is not correct. But then you have the one who's stubborn, who just won't move. No matter what you're going to say, they don't even engage with you in a debate. I'm just not moving. I'm not budging. Take it or leave it, right? What does that mean? That means in the human condition, it's really below. It's sub-rational. It's a selfishness for the most part. But when it comes to things of holiness, it's super rational. It's beyond comprehension. You can't convince me to do it any other way. No matter what you're going to tell me, I'm not going to change because I believe in something that's higher than this. And that's the true definition of a stiff-necked people, is we don't give up. We don't give up. Look where we are. We're 3,300 plus years from Sinai, and we're still here because we don't give up. We should have thrown in the towel a long time ago, but we keep on pushing. We don't give up. Why? Because the part of us, the part of our soul, the Yechida part of our soul, knows a truth. And you can try to convince me from today till tomorrow that I should do otherwise, but there's a part of me that knows otherwise. Even when our behavior doesn't necessarily correlate with that core belief, the belief is still there. And when push comes to shove, that belief gets manifested. Oh, we ran out of time already. Look at that. All right, any questions?
That you were saying the altar Rebbe.
It's called Tanya. You can find it on Chabad.org. It's called Lessons in Tanya. Yeah, there are plenty. You can also find plenty of audio and video classes to navigate. It's hard to navigate on your own, but with a good course. If you like to listen to podcasts, look for Rabbi Shais Taub, Shais Taub, Taub. He does. You should be able to find it. He does. I don't know if it's on the podcast or on YouTube. He does a 3-hour, what's called soul maps. He maps out the whole book of Tanya, all 53 chapters in 3 hours, which is fascinating. It's a great entryway to then begin to study the chapters.
Okay. And what was his last name?
Taub, Taub.
And what was that book you were saying, the Alter Rebbe, it was like a intermediary type of book?
That's the same book.
That's-
So the book
okay.
of Tanya is also known as the Sefer Shel Beinanim, the book of the ordinary person or
Okay.
the intermediary person.
Okay, thanks. I'm very ordinary.
We're all trying to be ordinary. Yes.
What's the difference between Yehuda and Yehud, like the Rishonim?
It's the same word. It's the same word. Yechida here is a noun. It's the name of that dimension of the soul. L'shem Yechud is, we're asking that the action that I take should be a unified action, but at its core, it comes from the word echad, which means one. There's a oneness there. Other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, as mentioned, August 11th, instead of the regular class, we're going to have the How Israel Wins. If you want to join us, please take a form and look forward to seeing everybody.